Hey there, folks. Welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And have we got an exciting episode for you today? We are chatting with Chad Townsend, the co-captain of the North Queensland Cowboys. And Ben, not only is it an insightful chat with a very articulate person, but we get to get inside the mind of the professional athlete. What else are we going to cover?
Well, in speaking of getting inside his mind, he shares with us his 3 traits that have been the foundations of his success. Those 3 traits. And then, Bryce, I'm going to wrap up the show with a budget story of winners and losers. So hang around to the end and you'll hear me rant about the winners and rant about the losers as we talk the federal budget once again.
We cover a lot, folks. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to 2 of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. And as I say every week, mate, welcome back to you too.
Well, mate, thanks for having me back. It's always good to be back after another solid performance on the weekend. I got to the game. It was a bit of a cold day, but the boys found a way.
Yeah.
Good.
I got to the game. Geelong got it done over Adelaide down at GMHBA.
Oh, so maybe we're going for the rings, mate. The blue rings. Is that what's going to happen?
My oldest loves Geelong, so I love going and supporting him, Ben. But we're not talking AFL today, mate. We're talking NRL. We've got a very special guest. In fact, we're talking to the captain of the North Queensland Cowboys today. Chad Townsend. So super excited to have that conversation.
Yeah,
but before we do, we've got a couple of things to talk about. One, just another reminder to those folks that we're doing a shout out for Winter Series. And we want folks to come and join us on the Winter Series. Now is the time. We'll put a link in the show notes. There is a link. Click on that link, leave your details, and our team will reach out to you. Also, Ben, we've got someone who wants to join our team.
Yes, Bryce, we do. Our tax team is expanding. We love the work that we do with our tax team. We specialise in helping mum and dad investors with their residential property tax returns. And so we're looking to add a new tax agent to the team. So if you are interested, and it doesn't matter where you live in Australia, but you're a tax agent and you love building relationships with mum and dads and people who are interested in resi property, we would love to hear from you. The details are in the show description if you want to learn more about that opportunity to join our tax team.
Yes, very much so. So also a survey reminder. We're getting some survey responses, Ben, where people are telling us where they've heard about us, which has been super insightful. So we just want to do a little nudge and just say, if you haven't done that, if you could let us know, it is super, super helpful for us to know where are people finding us.
And it's official. It is taking a minute to complete. It's not one of those 1-minute surveys where people get there and it's like 3 or 4 minutes later. It is literally 2 questions and they're taking a minute to. So please, if you've got any value at all out of the pod from us over the journey, can you give us a minute of your time? Because we would love to know where you discovered us so we can obviously let more people know about our community and build that community out so we can transform more and more lives, because we're on a mission. We're on a mission here to achieve financial peace. So please help us help others.
Thank you, folks. Quick shout out about the expenses on the More platform, Ben. That we're getting some feedback that's super helpful, right?
That has been really well picked up. I mean, everyone wants to know where their money's going. So again, it's another classic thing. So I've built a little tutorial and I'll put the details in also the show description as well. So if you want to watch that tutorial, please jump on there and go straight to that YouTube channel and you'll see that tutorial as well as a plethora of others about how to make your wealth big, go faster, how to start setting up your money smarts. All of that great stuff is in that YouTube channel for more as well.
So the bottom line is, Ben, if you go and look in the show notes or the show description, tap on the show description, there's a whole world of awesomeness that you can go and find out a whole bunch of really cool stuff. So I just want to encourage people to go and do that because that'll be super helpful. So very good. Hey, we hit a milestone, Ben.
We did.
It snuck up on us because we are episode 442, right?
Yeah.
But we've actually done 500 episodes.
Oh.
500 episodes.
500.
Now, people go, hang on a second.
Did it work?
Did work that time. You're going for the second one. Beautiful.
Sounds like a bit of a sick screamer, but
yeah, you've got to be disciplined with that. But so the people go, hang on a second, didn't you just say episode 442? How is it possible to have 500 episodes? Well, it appears we've done 58 bonus episodes.
bone episodes.
Yeah, bone episodes.
Bone episodes, as we refer to them.
So there you go, folks. We've hit a milestone. 500 episodes. You and I have banged on here, Ben, for a little while, so which is good. All right. Hey, we don't want to leave our guest waiting too long, so I want to rip into today's Mindset Minute. And do you know, Ben, over those 500 episodes, one of the things that I found about this podcast is we've received some wonderful feedback from people that says, hey, look, this podcast has been very helpful. We've learned some of the foundational principles. But what it's done is it actually forced you and me to be sharper, because you actually learn in the teaching probably more than in the listening, right? So it's forced us to go and sharpen our content and what we know and our frameworks and our thinking. So with that as a context, I was listening to a podcast by Morgan Housel, right? Now, for context, I've mentioned Morgan before. It's a book you and I have both read, Ben, The Psychology of Money. I found it a fascinating read, and as a result of that, I've gone down the rabbit warren of Morgan. I've look at his tweets, and I listened to some of his other details. He's about to release another book. And I just like the calm, timeless, evergreen message, right? So I was listening to this podcast of his, and came up, and it was about the art of spending, Ben. So we talk about investing here, and we talk about trapping surplus, but what about spending? We don't talk a lot about spending, right? Specifically around the psychology of spending. So what I want to do is what Morgan did is he, in this podcast, full credit to Morgan. So buy his book, listen to his podcast. I'm not trying to steal his ideas. I just want to use it as an exercise for me personally, Ben, to reinforce and linger on some of these ideas for it to land, but hopefully allow it to sink into our community as well. Because I think there's some wonderful insight. So basically, he said money is really complicated. There is a scientific side of it, but there's also a human element that can defy logic. So it's personal and it's messy and it's emotional, and behavioral finance is well documented. But most of the attention historically has been on how people invest their money, not how, volatility and greed and fear, right? But not a lot on how they spend. So how you spend your money can reveal this existential struggle of what you find valuable in life. So who you want to spend your life with and how you want to be remembered, why you chose your career, the kind of attention you want from other people, all these big behavioral aspects of your life can be tied up in how you choose to spend your money. So I thought, great, let's actually have a look at some of these concepts on how we spend our money. Now, in the book, he goes, money is the greatest show on earth because of its ability to reveal things about people's character and values. Nice. So if there is a science to spending money, i.e. budgets and bargains, then there's also the art, because investing is largely hidden from us, but spending is very visual. I can see your house, I can see your car, I can see the clothes. So it shows, what it does show is more about who you are as more insightful than what you invest, right? So here's the first one, and I'll roll through these as we go through the week, Ben, and talk about them and seek your commentary as well. But this first one, so he's got some anecdotes about the art of spending, so the behavioural sides of spending money. Number one, your family background and past experiences heavily influence your spending preferences. Here's the quote that I loved. It was from the Washington Post back in June 1927. So we're talking before the Great Depression, Ben. We're talking about the Roaring 20s, okay? Mm-hmm. The more you were snubbed whilst poor, the more you enjoy displaying your wealth when rich. Let that land, right? I thought, okay, there was a time when I reflect on that in my own life, Ben, where I actually grew up. I grew up in a middle-class family, but probably lower middle class. We would define ourselves as battlers. And I was on the proverbial wrong side of the tracks, Ben. So, I lived in the suburb furthest away from school. I didn't have the latest shoes, all those sorts of things. So I think about when I first got in my 20s and I got some success around money, I probably displayed it a little bit too much. I went to the Gold Coast. I've talked about this in a podcast. So I lived in a penthouse. I bought a BMW. I bought a Harley, right? Whereas now I feel like I've matured. Like I drive a Toyota Hiace, so I can put the surfboards in the back. And I've gone from European car to definitely a utility vehicle, practical vehicle. So there's no designer badges on my cars anymore. So I feel like I've done a little bit of that. But if you think about NBA players, you think about the first thing when I read that comment was Conor McGregor. Have you seen how he just flaunts his wealth, right? And so I go, the more you were snubbed whilst poor, the more you enjoy displaying your wealth when rich. And I go, if I think about his backstory, and I don't know him clearly, I only know from the outside, but you start to see some of these patterns forming about how people do this, right? So it's timeless. It explains so much. During COVID, we had what was, we were all sort of locked in, and after that, we just did this spend-a-thon, right? It was called revenge spending. But we probably do more. There's probably revenge spending is probably more widespread than we think, based on how we were snubbed when we were poor. So he says a lot of spending is done to fulfill a deep-seated psychological need, much more than we give credit to. I want to leave that for you to think about, folks, in terms of your family background and past experiences heavily influence your spending preferences. Any thoughts, Ben?
And it comes up also in the academic research, Bryce, in regards to what you've just been talking about, that anchoring traditions, certain things, missing out and then never wanting to miss out again. I mean, there's a lot of people that have gone from rags to riches and again back to rags because they also then, because they just didn't have their internal balance right in terms of who they are and what their values were. So it absolutely can play for that. And I think the art of spending is a concept that is anchored in behavioural economics in terms of that, because we make sometimes really poor decisions when we're not in the best position to be spending on certain things, but we just have this need. It's, in our minds, we have this need, this want to be able to do these types of things, and that's a challenge for some people. So if you can understand that and you can get your internals right, you can then start to think about delayed gratification and looking at that type of thing. And it's a good segue into obviously our chat with Chad today. I mean, this is what it looks like when you get it right, but also, I mean, there's a little clue in there, and I know I'm jumping ahead, but there's a clue in there which we'll talk about when we finish the interview. I'll come back to it. Okay, so just hang around. I'll come back to my little thought here now when we finish our chat with Chad.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. So shout out to Tom Simons for connecting me with Chad. You and I had a conversation with him recently. It was insightful. It was articulate. It was a great chat. And I really want to encourage people to lean in on this, and it may break some of the myths that you have around projecting onto these professional athletes, because Chad's is a compelling story. It's a good one. Let's cut to the conversation you and I had recently with Chad Townsend. All right, Ben, we've got a very special guest today on the Property Couch. We are chatting with Chad Townsend, who is an Australian professional rugby league footballer who co-captains and plays as a goal-kicking halfback for the North Queensland Cowboys in the NRL. A Cronulla Sutherland junior, Chad was a key contributor in helping bring home the Cronulla Sharks' first ever NRL premiership in 2016, fulfilling his dream of bringing the Provan Summons Trophy to his boyhood club. Chad has also played for the New Zealand Warriors and represented New South Wales City in the city versus country origin. Away from the field, Chad is an avid podcaster, a video blogger, as the lead man on his YouTube channel, Chad Townsend, and his popular podcast, Talk of the Town. Welcome to the Property Couch, Chad.
Thanks for having us, guys. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mate, you're a busy man. If it's not just with what you're doing with your professional stuff, you're a father of 3. You're also doing your own social media commitments. So there's a fair bit going on for you, which we really want to delve in today and get excited about. And but before we sort of get into too much, we want to start at the top. And we want to have a conversation with you about What was money like for you growing up over the dinner table? Were there any conversations with your family?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, for me growing up, obviously I was a 90s kid. So, money wasn't really the hot topic of conversation. And, I guess looking back on it, I never really had those conversations with my parents about, saving money. I still remember when I was in primary school, those little yellow envelopes. I think it was the Commonwealth Bank where you put your $2 in. And, that brings back a couple of memories. But it wasn't till I got a little bit later in my teenage years where those conversations really started to ramp up, and I started to, I guess, take a key interest in money.
So with those topics and the key interests, what was interesting to you? Where did you want the conversations to go? What did you tend to lean in on?
Yeah, so I obviously from a young age I loved my rugby league. I started playing football when I was 5 years old, and fell in love with the game. And then it was about when I got to the age of about 14 where I was like, I want to play in the NRL, and then obviously dedicate a lot of my time to making that happen. As you sort of progress through the grades, you meet people here and there and coaches, and that's probably one of the best things about playing sport is the people you meet along the way. And I was very fortunate enough when I was about 17, 18 that I met a guy by the name of Tony Kane, and he had played in the NRL but had just had a very serious knee injury about 12 months prior. And we were chatting at training. He was a couple of years older than me, and sort of said to me that he was studying financial planning and would like to have a chat with him about, creating a budget and saving some money and, planning for the future. And I was like, mate, that sounds great. So it was from that moment that, we had a conversation, we put a savings plan in place, and just try to be as diligent as I could and make some sacrifices around money. And then, invested some money over the course of the years, which I'm sure we'll get into. But yeah, it was those conversations, and that really, I guess, kickstarted, my adventure.
And Chad, coming back to the kitchen table, did your mum and dad talk about their financial affairs and running the household at all, about bills or anything like that? Like, tell us a bit about that story. Did you feel like money was a taboo topic, or was it regularly discussed? And did you talk investing or anything like that as well?
No, we never spoke about investing. I come from a blue collar family. My parents actually split up when I was about 14. So that threw its own challenges in. But, we owned our own house. And then when my parents split up, they obviously had to sell the house. And I moved in with my old man. And he had one thing I learned from my old man was just his work ethic. And when he had to, I guess, buy another house, I knew that he stretched himself and he was working really hard to provide for myself and the house. And that's something that really stuck with me and still sticks with me to this day now that I have my own family, that, the work ethic that's required to provide for your family and give your family, a good life. That's a lesson I definitely learned from my old man.
Do you think, because there's a couple of things you just said there. There was Tony Kane, who was a mentor and did the budgeting, and then your dad with the work ethic. Do you think that those couple of those things there really set you up for, as you say, we will talk about your investing shortly, but because the temptations that you were about to face are very real when you are a young man in a high profile environment with good opportunities to earn a lot of money. But it sounds like you've had these foundational principles laid nice and early. I think you said 17 or 18. So that sounds like that was fortuitous, that watching your dad, seeing that work ethic, and then having Tony say, let's do a budget, let's put some money aside. How much value do you place on those couple of early things on your financial management skills?
Yeah, still to this day, I go back to that conversation, and I'm really thankful for the advice and that starting when it did, because I guess at that age when I was 17, 18, it was, I guess a year or two later where I actually made my NRL debut. And that's when I started to earn some really good money, and I guess a lot better money than other people that were my age. And, I was earning the money, and I had the same sort of saving strategy as I did if I was earning, a lot less. So, I'd spoken to Tony about, saving some money, and then he said to me, mate, next year we're going to buy a house. And I was like, oh my goodness, like we're going to buy a house? And so we, I was like a bit blown away at the time, obviously still being, I think I was about 20 at the time, and not many guys at my age at 20 were buying houses. And we did that. We actually managed to save enough money, and we ended up getting my first unit.
Now, Chad, that's an awesome story, and thank God for Tony coming into your life. Can you remember the basic structure? Like, did he have like the classic, 20, 30, 50, 20, 30 sort of model where effectively 50% goes towards committing to buying a house or something like that? Then you got 50% for expenses, I'll get this right, 30% for investing or putting away, and 20% for living and fun money?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it was those types of percentages that allowed me to, regardless of if I was earning, $500 a week, $1,000 a week, or $5,000 a week, it was the same structure. It was important that I still had money to live and be a 20-year-old, but also important that I make the most of my situation in the money that I was making at such a young age, because where you only get one career and you only get one chance to make the most of your money. So, that was extremely important. And I had to show, a lot of discipline too, which I was very happy that I did.
Well, I did completely botch that up. So just for everyone at home, it's 50% for needs, 30% for wants, and 20% for savings. So people would have been listening to that going, what is he on? Like,
so they just would have asked you to say disciplinary, and then they would have got it, mate. So, sorry, Chad, a joke from a couple of episodes ago. So let's lean in on the buy a house thing at 20s. Your eyes just lit up there. You went, really? We're buying a house. So how long did it take for you for that to land? Like, was that sure we'll get around to it, or did it happen very quickly? You obviously saved some money for the deposit, but talk us through the mindset, the cogs ticking over as you're contemplating something that prior to Tony saying that you weren't contemplating.
Yeah, so I guess for complete transparency, I guess in 2011, that was the year I made my NRL debut, and I was earning $55,000, my contract was, and I think it was about $3,000 per game that I played, and I played 11 games that season, and after my 10th game, I got a $10,000 bonus. So I was able to save some pretty good money in 2011, and I was still living at home, so that definitely helped me. I was paying a bit of board to my old man, and then that's when Tony said to me, mate, let's buy a house next year. So in 2012, he said to me, let's go and buy a unit. So we spoke about getting one in Cronulla, which was right near where I was living at the time, and I remember going to the bank and withdrawing all of my money in my account and taking it and emptying my account and going, oh my goodness, I've just emptied my bank account. I've got like $3,000 left, and what am I actually doing? So it was, at the time I was like, am I doing the right thing? What am I doing? And I just had to trust my gut and trust Tony, which I had that relationship with him, which was really important. I had to trust, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions I've ever made.
There's a really good story in the sense that when you start early and you let yourself be able to create that equity, we'll build on that story as well. I want to come back to, did you get a loan as part of that purchase, Chad? Like, do you remember how you went about sort of getting your very first mortgage?
Yeah, I did. So I got a loan, and I guess another thing that I was really lucky with, that Tony had a friend, and I knew of him, and he was a mortgage broker, and it was at that moment that Chris Pryor, his name is, I'll give him a shout out because I've been with him for nearly maybe 13 years. He's helped me with every single mortgage I've had, and again, I spoke about before about having relationships with people that you can trust, and obviously being a sportsman, that is really, really important. And I'd give that advice to all younger athletes, that you need to have a team around you that you can trust. And again, I was really lucky that that Chris, got my mortgage and allowed me. I can't remember who the loan was with, to be honest, but the unit we bought was a 2-bedroom unit, 1 street back from the beach, and I bought it for $400,000. So at the height, I think it went more than double, which I leveraged off and was able to go on to my next property journey. But like I said before, it was one of the best decisions, but it was one of the biggest decisions I've made in my life.
Can you give us a little insight to what you just said before about having relationships that you can trust? Because that's a general rule for everyone, right? But what are you seeing as a professional athlete? Because it's everyone probably wants a piece of you, right? So it's probably an amplified experience for people like you, and in situations like you where you're in such a public profile environment that everyone wants to give you some advice, Chad. So how do you build that team of trust for someone else who's listening to this who can relate to your story, where you actually get to filter through some of the BS and be able to actually go, this person is actually chasing my agenda, not theirs?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, people see athletes or NRL players as, everyone's earning $1 million and everyone's living this lavish lifestyle, which is just completely not true. A lot of guys are still, just fighting for their next contract, earning, $100,000 like the rest of the general public. But I think, people see, I guess, athletes as, dollar signs, like you just said, and, try and take them for a little bit of a ride, which that's where you have to be extremely important. And a lot of our younger guys that I've played with actually will come to me and actually ask me for a bit of advice. And I'll always just say, like, investing your money is so, so important. And to what you said before, Ben, like starting sooner rather than later is also extremely important. But you can't rush, and you have to have a team around you that you trust, and you have to do your due diligence. So I think for people that are out there listening, like that goes for everyone. Like, putting a great supportive team around you and your family that you can trust and rely on and catch up with on the regular basis, and have those honest conversations as well.
Yeah, Chad, it's an interesting point. I mean, I remember hearing a story of one of the successful Essendon players talking to his coach, Kevin Sheedy, and Kevin Sheedy spent more time talking to him about wanting to make sure that he got a deposit for a house, more so than his football career, which was quite fascinating in the sense that, because you're only in it for a short period of time, right? So your earning capacity, your career like yours will hopefully go for, sort of 15 years. That's an amazing career. But most players' careers are as short as maybe 3 to 5, right? So ultimately, if you can come away with something out of that and then build on that to obviously set yourself up with a baseline financial position, you can then obviously start to build from there going forward.
Yeah, that's definitely the most important thing, because I guess in the professional sports industry, you see all different walks of life and all different financial walks of life as well. I mean, you see guys that are at the really top end of earning and have the long-term contracts and the security. And then you see, like I said before, you see the guys who are grinding and really just fighting for their next contract on the minimum wage. So some guys play 10 years and finish without even a house or any investments. And that's from, poor advice, poor discipline. And then other guys finish with, an unbelievable portfolio, passive income, the ability to work a job that they want to do post-football. So that's, I guess, something I'm passionate as well. Being involved with the RLPA and the Players Association is trying to help players prepare for their next phase of their life too.
Yeah, and I think the general public can easily project onto these players, like you hinted earlier, that they all think the same way. They've all got this, a big chunk of cash that they can invest, but it's very easy for us to forget, A, you're human, B, you're elite at one thing that gets a lot of, probably elite at a lot of things, right? But you're elite at one thing that gets a lot of attention, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you understand money, or you understand how to manage money, or you don't have a background where there was a lot of lack. And so therefore you go, well, I want to show that I've made it. And the way I do that is by spending. So there's a whole bunch of human behavioral things that go on, but it's very easy for us just to project and go, oh yeah, Chad, he's got lots of cash, he's got lots of opportunities, right down to the last person on your list exactly the same. So I think that's easy to do. The observation that I've made is, Ben and I have spoken to a number of professional athletes on this podcast, including yourself and Matt Schramer and Tom Simons, but we've also spoken to Andrew Bogut, and I've formed a friendship with one of the guys from the Nitro Circus tour as well. And the people that think like you, Chad, have got a very similar focus where that they have a very clear sense that this is a short period of time, and they have a very clear sense of some of the things you said, discipline, knowing that they want to invest their money, but also knowing that if I do something right now, I don't have to be a legend. I just have to do a few things right, so that when I actually finish my playing career, I'm actually in a position where I am in a position of strength to determine what I do next, rather than a position of weakness where I've just got to pick up a shovel and take what I can get.
And that's probably been the biggest thing for me, Bryce, has been, whenever I finish my professional playing career, I will still get a job, after football. But it's, I guess, playing in the NRL, we're lucky enough in the fact that we get, a kick start in life, or a head start with the ability to make, a lot more money than, I guess, the average person over, that 10 to sort of 15-year period, if you're lucky. But if you make the most of it, it can give you a great kickstart. And like I said before, having that plan in place and thinking long term, like my planning with my team, my financial planner, my mortgage broker, has always been about long-term success and living a life that I want to live post-football, and doing the things. And my wife and I quite often talk about, me playing golf when I'm a bit older and hanging out with the kids a lot, and, living a life that I want to live, but, living that structured, disciplined life now with regards to money, and making a few sacrifices and then reaping the rewards a little bit later on.
Kudos to you too also, Chad, in the sense that you've recognised that there are others out there who may not have had that chance meeting with Tony or been in that environment. So for you to actually be allowing for that to pay it forward in terms of working with the Players Association and getting that message out there to all of those other kids that are coming through the high performance and elite programs that happen in the NRL. Well done for that. So before because obviously we want to double click on getting to the investment story and what's been part of your strategies, because that's what we're about. We're about obviously building wealthier tomorrows. From a professional point of view, in terms of you've talked about discipline, you've talked about application, hard work. What is it about your professional sporting career that you put down to the success that you've had? Can you sort of give a formula around what that looks like for you in terms of how you've been able to have this fantastic career and longevity in a high performance environment?
I think it's been a combination of a couple of things. I think it's definitely been discipline, and discipline, sacrifice, and hard work, because there's a lot of times in this game where your character's tested and, you might make a mistake, you might be down. I feel like I've faced every bit of adversity that our game has to offer, injury, form, suspension, going through things away from football, some distractions with that regard. And it's important how you manage those periods and how you get through. And I think I've been very lucky to have the team around me, my wife and I. She's been an absolute rock of my career. But also in the NRL, mistakes happen, bad games happen. That's a guarantee. But it's how you bounce back from that adversity or that mistake that really, really counts. Because I always go through this mantra that I will only focus on the things that I can control. I can't control what people say about me online. I can't control what people say about me on TV. I can't control what people say about me in the papers, but I can control how I train. I can control how I play. I can control how I act. I can control how I respond. And they're the things that I really focus in on and put all my energy into.
And Chad, how important is that network of support that you have? Because obviously, going through life, we all, make mistakes. We're humans, right? But there's obviously a network of psychologists, sports psychologists, coaches, and an inner circle of people around you who do that. How important have they been to you and your success?
Yeah, unbelievably. Look, I said before, I've been lucky enough. The people I've met, my teammates, coaches, my wife, and to put it real, like we athletes, we are just. I think you said it before, Bryce. We're normal people. Like we go through the same challenges as everyone else. We go through all those adversities that everyone else does. But we just play football on the weekend. Like I'm a normal person, but I play football. So. The support network is so important, and it's okay to sort of reach out and speak to people. And I'm definitely lucky that I've still got a great group of mates outside of football as well who are back in Sydney, and the guys I went to school with, and I'm still really, really close with them. So having that social aspect, I guess, away from work and hobbies away from work as well, I think is really important.
I think you're leaving clues too about your success too, because discipline, sacrifice, and hard work are very admirable, right? And I think you can apply those three things over to investing, and we will pivot to that very shortly. But the last thing I want to talk about here is for someone who's listening to this. Let's say someone who is in the similar situation to you, is they're a normal person, but they just play good rugby on the weekend like you. What were some of the sacrifices along the way that you've made that they could be trying to use you as a mentor? And I'm talking about not getting up at 5 a.m. and putting in the extra work. I'm talking about what are the sacrifices you did with your money that you observe others aren't making, where the temptations are being drawn, where you were able to be disciplined in that regard, and where they could learn from it as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I see a lot of this in my industry with some of my colleagues. And some of the biggest things that I've sacrificed, I remember when I spoke previously about that first house that I made. So usually at the end of the season, we'd go on a footy trip or an end of season holiday. And that season that I bought my house, I was like, I'm not going to go on a holiday this year. Just going to buy a house instead. So there was one. I bought a really small or an old Commodore, and I had that Commodore for a long time. And I'd signed new deals, and I was like, you know what, I don't need a new car. I'm not going to buy a new car. I'm not going to spend all that money on a new car. And then a couple of years later, I was actually lucky enough to get a sponsored car. So I was able to get through, the majority of my career without actually buying a new car. So there's a sort of another thing that I would definitely, I guess, put down as a sacrifice. They're probably two of the big ones that come to mind.
I think they're important little anecdotes for people to listen to, right? Because, here they are, the captain of a very high-profile club in the north part of Queensland was driving a Commodore for a long time, right? And decided to give up a holiday and buy a house. I think they're really admirable. So, all right, let's lean in on the investing. So you bought this unit in Cronulla. You said 400,000, 2 beds, 1 street back from the beach. This has clearly been a catalyst for you because it's obviously a great part of Sydney. So what happened? Tell us what the transition was like from one unit in Cronulla to buying your next property.
Yeah, so the next property I bought after that was I think it was a townhouse in Wollongong, and I think it might have been 12 to 24 months later after the first purchase, and I'd saved up a little bit of money because by that time my NRL contract had gone up a little bit, and I was able to save some more money. So together with the money that I saved and drawing down some equity from the Cronulla unit, we're able to come up with a deposit, and we used a buyer's agent actually for this one, which was I got a great referral from my team again, and they were excellent through the whole process. Again, it was someone that I trusted. And, it was putting, obviously you pay for a buyer's agent, but you sort of, I guess, give them everything. And I was happy at the time to do that because, I didn't know the next boom suburb or didn't know the growth sort of things that I was looking for. So I had the money I could afford it. And, we went with a townhouse in Wollongong, and I think it was 3-bedroom, and it was about 600,000 we got it for, and I've still got it to this day as well. So that was number 2.
Do you still have the Cronulla unit?
I've still got the Cronulla unit actually. Yeah, so I've still got both of them.
That's an awesome story, but it's also highlighting another thing that's becoming really clear: delayed gratifications in there, discipline, hard work, sacrifice. But you're also honest about taking advice, but taking specialist advice in the different areas. Like you take your specialist advice from your coach about your performance. You'll take your specialist mortgage advice from your broker. You're taking your financial advice from your financial planner. And now you've just, honestly said, hey, how am I going to be better than a buyer's agent? They do this full time. I mean, it's the same sort of thing as me trying to run out on a pitch and having a go with you big boys and thinking I'm going to hold my own. It's just a ridiculous concept, and it just wouldn't come true. So I think there's another little takeaway there around who am I getting my advice from around specific elements of my life. And you didn't take that advice from your dad or your brother or Uncle Barry who says, here's the next big thing, because they have no experience in that area. So I think it's also a really good message there. All right, so there we are. So there's 2 down. Tell us about the next phase of wealth creation on your journey, Chad.
Yeah, so it was, I remember speaking to my financial planner, and I was pretty interested in property first and foremost. That over, I guess, a share portfolio, which I got into a little bit later, which I'll touch on. But I remember before I bought that Wollongong unit, I remember speaking to a colleague or a teammate of mine at the time, and he said to me that you should be looking to get in that 4 houses over the next 5 or 6 years. And I was like, what? Like, that is just crazy. And just the thought of the possibility of that happening and doing that was obviously really, really high. But then I thought to myself, look, if I'm disciplined enough, and I know that I can do that, and I was quite confident in the fact when I bought that Carnival unit to obviously lowering my bank account a lot. So, you sort of get all your money out of the account. It's like, hey man, I had this amount of money in my account. Now I've got none, but it's in this, it's doing its work, better work elsewhere. And the next one we bought another house in Brisbane, and that was 500,000. And that was a 4-bedroom house. And then that was about 6 months after that, I bought another townhouse in Brisbane, and that was the 3-bedroom one. So those ones were kind of pretty close together. But again, I was able to utilize the ability to save some money, and also my earning capacity was, I guess, again, a lot more than the average person. But one thing I kept doing was I kept, lowering my bank account to an amount of like, $10,000 or $20,000, where it's a lot of a smaller float. And I'm like, man, like I've just been lowering my bank account, and it's a lot to do. But like I said before, I fell back on the fact that it's better for me to have the money or the investment elsewhere than sitting in my account. And a lot of people, I guess, find that hard to believe.
It's forced savings, right? Because effectively it's committed. So as soon as that money's committed, it can't be spent elsewhere. Chad, any during this phase, were you getting any sort of thorough cash flow modelling done as well? Or were you getting the sort of classic, here's what this property's out-of-pocket costs will be, so, how's that going to fit into your general living expenses and day-to-day living? Obviously, that big lump sum comes out, we're accessing equity, that's the classic way to do it. But in terms of the surplus cash flow into the household at the end of that period, were you sort of conscious of that, or not so, because you were relying on your financial planners and mortgage brokers?
Yeah, not really, to be honest. We were it was more so, with my income, and I had the ability to focus on some gearing with the property and get some money back at tax time with the deductions and things like that. So, being able to earn the money to I guess cover some of the out of pocket expenses definitely definitely helped. We still focused on making sure that I was still managing to save some money, and that was the most important thing, that I could still cover the expenses of the property, the rent. If the rent was or wasn't, that I was able to sort of, still have that plan in place where we spoke about before, the percentage of money was still able to go into certain parts.
So you've got the negative geared portfolio. That's what's building out. Can I get some further context around, is Marissa in the picture at this point as well? Your partner now, your wife? Is she?
Yeah, so she came in 2013, and that was, I think it was just as I got the Wollongong house, and she was working her own at the time, and we were saving money together. But my property journey at that time was all for me personally, and the money that I was saving was getting put towards that. So I was buying all these houses personally. But I guess just to jump forward, after those 2 Brisbane houses, I'll backtrack a little bit, and then I'll jump forward. Marissa and I actually bought a house together a couple of years later. But after those 2 Brisbane houses, we actually went and got I spoke to 2 really good mates of mine who are builders, and one's a builder and one's an electrician, and we wanted to come together and buy something that we could potentially do something with down the track. And we used a buyer's agent again, and we bought a freestanding house in Geelong, and we bought that for $400,000, and that's been excellent. So that was number 5.
Okay, and this is all still pre-children?
Yes, yeah. So this is all still pre-children, and that was, once I got that 5th house with my mates, we just went 3rd in, and I'll tell you guys a little bit of a story about that, because we wanted to, like I said, we wanted to buy something that potentially had something down the track that we could do together, which we haven't actually done yet. But because we only bought it for $400,000 between 3 of us, we put a 20% deposit down, and we had a strategy where every single week we'd all put $100 extra into the offset account, almost like a little bit of a savings account, and we just sort of let it sit and stay. And that's been happening for a couple of years now, and we're a couple of years away from paying that thing off, just between the 3 of us. And then the place actually has plans to be redeveloped for some townhouses, which we actually will look at in the future. So that's the last one I bought without Marissa.
But there's another one in the mix, right? So, because when we chatted on the phone before last week, you said there was 6. So is 6 still the number, or something happened in the last week?
So 6, this is probably the most exciting one, I guess. And it's not an investment, but by this time in my property journey, I had accumulated a portfolio which I was really happy with, and I was getting some great growth because I had invested early and I'd held on to for a number of years. And I met with my financial advisor, and I was like, mate, I'm ready to. I want to buy a house. And it was a conversation I had with a past teammate. His name was Chris Heinington, and we played together at the Sharks. And he said to me when we were playing that he knew where he wanted to live when he finished playing football, and he wanted to live in Terrigal. So with about 6 years to go in his career, he bought a big family house in Terrigal and decided to just try and rent it out and use it as an investment, and then just try and pay off the extra loan in that house and let it sit for the following 6 years until he retired. So I was like, mate, that's a great idea. So it was in 2019. My wife and I had been married. We just had we had a 1-year-old at that stage, and we went and bought our dream home in the Sutherland Shire. So we bought that house, and we just tried to attack the mortgage. We leveraged a lot of our other property and savings and went all in at it, put a big deposit on it, and now we're just trying to reduce some debt on that house. And we we stayed there in the house for a little bit, and then not long after that, I've moved up to Queensland, and I've been obviously living up here. We've now leased that house out, and we'll work on our debt reduction strategy with that house, and now that's where we plan to live, post football.
And the 6-year rule kicks in on that property, which is the classic story of your principal place of residence. Your work is taking you elsewhere. You can lease it out, but ultimately any capital growth that's occurring during that, because it is your principal place of residence, is going to be capital gains tax free as we record today, and the government hasn't changed any rules. So that's a good news story.
Yeah, so very, very happy.
Mate, that's a brilliant story, right? So there's a couple of things we want to lean into, but so you're living in North Queensland now. Are you in a purchased place or a rented place?
No, we rent up here. We've actually, so we've moved a couple of times, but we just feel like it just suits us, because like I said before, I've still got those 6 properties. I feel like I'm pretty heavily geared in property, and that's why I then started a share portfolio. But I don't feel like I need to buy anymore, and I feel like it'd be better for me to just rent up here, because if I was to buy, it'd almost be like a bit more of an expense, where I can just, exit a house up here when I need to. And I think some people don't understand in our Australian culture that renting is great, or renting is totally fine. Like people talk down about renting, and I don't understand it. I really don't. And I hope the culture changes at times, because it's totally fine, especially, when you're working away or you've got properties elsewhere and people are renting them. So I hope that changes.
Well, Chad, that's the concept, right? I mean, ultimately, rent money is dead money if you're not trapping any other surplus and putting that money to work. In your case, you've built the perfect model of, when I'm young, start early, build out a wealth base, before the family arrives. Yes, we also need to acknowledge that your income is higher than the average Australian household income, so you've been able to maximise that. That's true. But then you put the big rock in the jar, right? So it's this beautiful planned story of big rock in the jar. You know where you're going to come back to. You'll probably do a bit of renovation to that as you move back into it. So you've got plans in terms of what you're going to do with that asset. In terms of the Geelong property, the fact that it's a freestanding house, but it's owned 3 ways, and you probably got plans for at least 3 townhouses on that site. So when you subdivide that, you're all going to come out with one individual, singly owned asset as part of that particular story. And now you're building the property, the passive income story also through shares. So you are the perfect picture of someone who has made your money work harder for you. And as a value add, you get to then rent, in terms of where you want to live, and then focus on being the best that you can at your career, which is also another, positive of that. If you feel happy at home and you're living well and you've got a great spot there, maybe on the Strand or wherever you are, in Townsville, that's awesome, because that just basically frees you up in terms of being able to execute on what you do well.
Yeah, definitely. That's exactly right. We actually do have a nice little view up here. We're over near the hill. We actually can see the stream, so it is great. And I think, in our industry, in my industry, so when we bought that house, I was lucky enough to be playing at the club where I grew up at. So playing at the Sharks, my family and friends were around the area, but understanding that, hey, I could be up and out of here at any moment with my contract and playing elsewhere. So, we well and truly understood that, and knowingly, were able to, put that aside and be like, we might have to move, and that's totally fine. And we found a home here up in North Queensland and have been loving our time so far.
Brilliant.
Chad, you're a compelling human and a compelling story, because for context, you're 32. You might have recently had a birthday, but you're in your early 30s, right? So there is a lot of wisdom here from this conversation, from someone who has, from Tony when you were 17, 18, to now we're having this conversation with you in your early 30s. the wisdom and the clarity of mind and the clarity of thought that you have, I think, is a real credit to you. So first of all, well done on that. Secondly, I hope it acts as a really good source of inspiration for others who are in the same situation as you. My question is around you're young in years, but you're as an athlete, there is a clock, right? So what does that look like for you in terms of your planning now? God forbid you're playing for another few years, all those sorts of things. But you must be keeping an eye on, the next steps. What's some of the thought process that you've gone through that other athletes could learn from you on around? Because clearly you've set up your finances, right? But what about the headspace? And, I've watched a lot of, in preparation for this, I've watched a lot of your videos. You're revered in your world on a Friday night or a Sunday afternoon or a Saturday. And at some point in time, that adrenaline hit is going to no longer be there. What have you done for preparation around that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's, being 32, my current contract finishes at the end of next season. And, physically and mentally, I feel great. But, I guess you have to treat it like next year could be the end. And it is, if I'm genuinely honest, it's foreign territory for me. I've never had to really negotiate the thought of not playing. I've always, spoken to my wife or my agent about, what's the contract situation look like? Do we have any offers? Where can we go? What should we do? But also, if I'm real, my wife and I speak about, I guess, the next phase of our life quite a lot. And I always sort of go back to what are the things that interest me? What are my hobbies? What are my passions? What's a dream job for me outside of football once I finish playing? And I'm going to strive and use the same work ethic that I have that's gotten me, 14, 15 years in the NRL to dial into that. And one of the other things that I've been able to do over the course of my career is I have put a lot of energy into things away from football or hobbies. And that's a balance that's really worked for me, because I found early on in my career, if I was just football, 100% focused on football, it wasn't healthy for me. I was putting a lot of pressure on myself and I wasn't playing well, where now I've got a great balance between my wife, my kids, being a father, some business outside of football, some interests. I love golf and all these things that, hey, when it's time for me to be a dad, I'm all in. When it's time for me to be at training, I am all in. And then when I'm at home or where I'm wherever, that's how I sort of divide up my time. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting conversation, I think, next season, when those conversations or those questions do actually start happening. What are you going to do? Because like I said, I haven't navigated this area before, and it doesn't worry me or scare me, but it is. It's going to be interesting.
Well, I think the lesson here for anyone who's listening is you don't have to have this conversation from the position of worrying about money. You get to have this conversation from the position of how can I best utilize the very many years that are still left in my life. So I think that's a credit too. What's the goal for you with property? So we've clearly heard the accumulation phase. You've now been investing for about a decade. Is that right?
Yep.
So what's your time horizon? Are you thinking in decades so that this is, you have these properties 30s, 40s, 50s and have the debt retired so you can just be pulling the income? Or do you have a plan to sell some down? What's the goal?
Yeah, so I'd always spoken to my financial planner and my wife about when I retire, what that looks like, because obviously, my level of income goes from here to potentially here. And just having a look at, what my, I guess, affordability is with regards to where the properties are at the moment. And obviously interest rates are playing a very interesting role at the moment. But our biggest thing was the debt reduction on our principal place of residency back in Sydney, and trying to just reduce that debt as much as possible. So we've had conversations about potentially selling, one or two properties at the moment to just, reduce that level of debt. But I'd love to keep one or two, especially I'll definitely keep that one in Geelong with the boys, because that project is still in the work in the future. I'd love to keep my first one in Cronulla. I just, it's got a little bit of an emotional attachment, even though it's not good to be emotionally attached. But I think ideally I'd like to sell a couple to pay down my own house, and then hold on to maybe one or two to just continually to grow. And then I think it's important to just keep revisiting what's working, going off the numbers as well, and putting a plan in place that you can just go all in with.
That message, Chad, about having a plan, looking at the numbers. You're now talking in my DNA space here. This is the area where it's really, really important, because what you're potentially doing with all of the money that is coming in, that elevated income that you've got now, that's either going into an offset or it's going into redraw. Now, what that will allow you to do, if you're building up tens of thousands and in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars in those environments, guess what that does? It buys you time, right? And it buys you time to see where things land in terms of what's next for you, right? Now, what's critical about that is, as you say, your income may not drop as significantly, because who knows, you might get a commentator contract or certainly an extended contract and so forth. So what's the beauty of that? And for anyone who's listening and playing along at home, is don't make any knee-jerk reaction decisions, because what we've trained you on this podcast to do is liquidity is king. And if you've got liquidity in terms of money, big lumps of money in offsets or big lumps of money in redraw, preferably offsets, we've told you why in the past episode, but if you've got that amount, that just buys you time to see where things land. And so you're not then forced to make a quick sale of a particular property. And then we also sometimes see people say, well, that one's performed the best, so I'm going to sell that one. But that's probably not the best way to look at it. You probably want to be looking at the ones that have underperformed, but then also assess the timing in the market, because there might be an uplift in there. But if you can hold on to those assets, and if you do some sophisticated modelling, you'll actually see that even if you are going backwards from a cash flow point of view for say 12 or 18 months, but then interest rates start coming down, and then all of a sudden the rising tide's lifting all ships again, that was the smartest decision you ever made, was to not sell, to trade through that period because of your liquidity position, and then ultimately you still kept 5 of the 6, or you kept 6 of the 6. Do you know? And that was genius, right? But that genius comes in doing the modelling of the numbers, and then seeing basically, make the invisible visible, and then you're able to then make a conscious and informed decision, as opposed to, finger in the air stuff and say, well, okay, income's dropped, I now need to quickly sell those two just to feel comfortable. Because that's what Bryce and I have been talking about for the last sort of 6 to 12 months as interest rates are going. The knee-jerk reaction is to sell to feel comfortable, as opposed to doing the work on your numbers and then sort of saying, well, actually, I don't need to sell. I can trade through this period, because after any sort of decline, there's always uplift in terms of what that story looks like.
That's a great bit of advice. And I definitely took a lot out of that just there myself, because I get some of my teammates will ask me for just some general advice, just whether we're talking over a coffee or whatnot. And, if they're coming from somewhere where they haven't really done anything, it's like, well, what can you do? Like literally today is like set up a savings plan. Like today is, start putting your money into certain buckets and saving. And then over time, working together to build up a plan and a team around you that can save, you time and also help you with your journey. So that was awesome.
Yeah, set up your more account is my advice. Obviously, set up, because start to trap money, start to think about what you're going to spend over the next 12 months, and then see what the pool of money's left over, and just continue that discipline. And obviously, we call that money smarts. That's definitely a really great way to get started. Chad, my final question to you is around. What are some of the big things you've learned around investing in property, say maybe capital growth or income? What are the sort of things that you look for, or that your buyers agents have told you, or the people around you that have told you has done well for you in terms of what you've bought and why you've bought them?
Yeah, I think I've bought all of my properties with the intention of trying to get capital gain. And the other thing that I learned from my team was that it's not going to happen overnight, and it's a process. It's a long-term thing. So, I never bought a property with the intention of it going up $100,000 in 6 months or 12 months. I understand that it's a process. It's a long-term thing, and that's the biggest thing I learned. Just to show patience, because like all things, I guess we're a day and age where people want things now, but showing that ability to have patience, have a long-term plan, stick to it, and everything should work out.
Brilliant.
I repeat, Ben, he's only 32.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it? Took 30 years to work that out.
Yeah, that's right. Folks, just reflect on what Chad just said, because it is powerful. Chad, my final one for you is an observation and then a question, right? But I'm glad that what Ben said to you before actually did resonate with you, because it feels like you've got all the right ingredients for time horizon. The people who are most successful in investing are the people that actually are around for the longest. Like, if they've made the right decisions early, the longer the time horizon, the longer they can delay, the better the results are, because the rents that you receive in the third decade are equivalent to your kids' lunch money today, right? The time just makes them look really insignificant. And so I was super interested too, because you've done some things really, really well. You've got this dream home lined up back in the Shire for you. And if you could hold these properties, because you've been investing for a decade, but if you can hold them for another decade, the amount of compounding that will happen in your portfolio will be significant. And the compounding of the rents will also be significant. That'll also help with the cash flow. But here's the beautiful thing, right? By the time you're 50 and held it for another decade again, the numbers look ridiculous if you don't sell the goose that lays the golden egg. So my encouragement is to double down on what Ben said. Look for opportunities for you to be able to trade your way through holding these for as long as possible while still achieving everything that you want to achieve. So just maybe that land. That's my observation. But my question for you is, what does it feel like for you to be in a position, again, you're a family man, your friends and your family are important. What does it feel like to be the boy who grew up in a blue-collar family, parents divorced at 14, hard work, discipline, made it on the big stage, and then get to a position now where you're one of the chosen few, actually not the chosen few, one of the disciplined few, who have actually put yourself in a position where you can set yourself up pretty well going forward. What does that feel like for the achievement? What does it also feel like inside to be able to do that?
Yeah, it feels great. I've actually never really thought about it too much until you put it like that, if I'm genuinely honest. I think you just go back over my journey to get here, both in life and in football. And I come from a pretty modest family in a modest neighborhood, worked hard and, put a good team around me. So the biggest thing now for me, or my motivation, is my family and my children. And I am really focused on making sure my kids have the best childhood possible and also the best future. So, I want to help my children out with their, investment journey and their, savings money, because there's no doubt we'll be having those conversations around the dinner table in a couple of years' time when they get a bit older. But look, it's definitely a good feeling. There's definitely a feeling of, I guess, satisfaction, but also, like, I don't feel like I'm there yet. Like, I still feel like there's a way to go for me and my journey, both, I guess with property and, with my career, both in football and then obviously in a couple of years' time out of football, because it's a journey. You get one life and you just want to make the most of your opportunity. So I've really enjoyed the journey, and that's been the biggest thing for me.
What mate? You're a great story. You're a talented sportsman, but I think from spending the last 50 plus minutes with you, I just think that you're a role model around how to conduct yourself outside of being a sportsman as well. So I think that's thanks a credit. So, mate, on behalf of everyone here on the Property Couch, thanks for being transparent and sharing your story.
No, thanks for having us, guys. I really, really appreciated coming on today. And as I said to you, Bryce, earlier in the week on the phone, I've actually listened to many of your guys' episodes and had a lot of takeaways. So, it's been a pleasure to be here. And, I'll come on any other time you need me. So if you need me to come on again, just hit me up. I'm more than happy.
Cool, mate. We've got that on tape now, mate. We'll hold you to that.
And you've got that type of gold for our community and inspiring people and motivating people to be the best version of themselves. Mate, we might have to get you back on. It's not going to be a want. It'll be a forced choice.
100%. But thanks again for your time.
All good. No worries, guys.
There you go, Ben. We've just spent a bit of time with someone who has put a lot of time and energy and thought into their life and creating a pathway that is admirable.
Start early, Bryce, as best you can before you ideally have kids. If you can get some sort of wealth behind you before you do that, like delayed gratification, hard work, discipline, sacrifice, which comes back to the point I was making at the start of the show when you were talking about the art of spending, right? It's this story around, that delayed gratification, but hard work. So if you're watching others work hard, you then get a grasp of the value of money. And if money comes easy to some people, sometimes they don't get that grasp. So they've come from a really poor background, but there's been no hard work around that. But then that anchoring effect can also be, I've lived off welfare all my life. And so now, and all of a sudden I've come into some money, but I just don't know how to organize it, save it, trap it. So some really interesting stuff in there. And I just want to, compliment Chad on his 32 years of young wisdom. And if he's paying that message forward to others, keep sharing that message, Chad, because it resonates and we love it because it fundamentally backs up everything that we're about in terms of all of the critical aspects of how you build wealth over time and what it means for you and your family and experiences as it anchors back to what's important to you. He's the poster boy for lifestyle by design, Bryce.
He is the poster boy for lifestyle by design. And there was no ego at all in that conversation. And there's lots of temptations for Chad to be full of ego energy because he is admired and revered as a sportsman, but he had a very clear vision of, okay, I play pretty good footy on the weekend, but there's other stuff that I'm just trying to navigate like everyone else is. And so for him to be a role model for, professional athletes, but also for anyone on some of the basics, like they apply to everyone, discipline, sacrifice, and hard work. And it also reminds us, Ben, that our income is a very powerful tool. So income, action, and compounding, right? So he had a period of time with good income, clearly took action from a young age and is prepared to play the compounding game. And what I loved about that conversation too, in the total devoid of ego, was he goes, "Thank you for Ben. That was something I hadn't thought about, the way that you said to him, is there a way that we could maybe hold on to this?" Which will hopefully get his mind ticking over around, okay, well, if I hold this through multi-decades, because I've had success in one decade, but what if I see how much success I can have in the second decade? And what actually happens if I hang around for the third decade? There are significant spoils awaiting if you can do that.
Yeah, and if you're not an elite sportsman, to your earlier point just now, Bryce, this relates to a lot of people who might be earning really high incomes but hate their jobs, right? So if you hate your job or you're not fulfilled in your work, do 10 years of it, earn that big income, but make sure you're putting as much of it into investments. So your money is working as hard as possible so you then can change careers and help others and have more fulfilling work if that's not floating your boat. So I think it definitely speaks to more than just high performance and elite athletes and professional athletes. It speaks to all of these people that might be earning really good money. What are you doing about putting some of it aside to build out that passive income so you can then have that freedom of choice later in life?
Ben, I forgot to ask him this question, but borderless, how did he feel about being borderless? Because he went from Cronulla to Wollongong, just down the road. Next one was headed up to Brisbane, travels to Brisbane a lot, then goes to another townhouse in Brisbane, then got one in Geelong, regional Victoria, not just Melbourne, but regional Victoria, and then got one in the Southern Shire. So was comfortable with borderless, comfortable seeking advice. Well, he was preaching to the choir around buyer's agency, Ben, but I was happy to hear that. And as you said, was happy to take advice. But a couple of the things I loved and I wrote down, got to have relationships you can trust. Well, that applies anywhere. You've got to make sacrifices along the way. Yep, you do. Investing your money is so important. Only one chance to make the most of your money. And here's his 3 things that he said, Ben: discipline, sacrifice, and hard work. Wow, they're pretty timeless.
Yeah, no, it's a great story, and we thank him very much for sharing his wisdom to our very, very beneficial community for taking on all of that great advice that he's shared with us today.
Agreed. Thank you, Chad. Hey, my life hack today, Ben, revolves around calendars. I saw this little hack cross my desk in a feed where someone was using their Google Calendar, and they can actually do a little section that says, do you know down the side of your calendar how it's got that time, and then it has the red line that slowly moves down, and on the left you can see the time. You can actually do 2 or 3 time zones, which I thought, we're dealing with people in the +8 time zone regularly, sometimes in the +7 time zone regularly. So what you can do is in Outlook, you can right click on that time on the side, and then it'll give you an option to show another time zone, and then show a second time zone and show a third time zone. So what I've done is I've actually added the second time zone, which is the +8. Not only is it my hometown, Ben, but it's also some of the professionals that we get to work with here on the Property Couch are also in that particular time zone. So it helps me when I'm setting up a meeting or whatever, just to quickly glance. Now, let's be honest, East Coast time zone to Perth time zone, -2, it's not that hard. But for some people, they're dealing with people in India, or they're dealing with someone in London, or they're dealing with someone on the East Coast of America, or they're dealing with someone on the West Coast. So I just came across that. For those of you who've already been doing that, where have you been? Why don't you tell me? For those of you that haven't implemented that, go and check it out. See if that adds value to your life. So that's my life hack today. Mate, what's making property news?
Well, it's budget day, Bryce. It was yesterday or the day before, whatever it was. I mean,
lost tracking
it was
days, mate. 2 days ago.
Lost tracking days, but here we are. So I thought I'll nail a few of the big points out of the budget. I want to first congratulate the Labor Party, Bryce.
What?
I think it's important to congratulate.
That's not like you.
It's their first surplus in 35 years.
Yeah.
It's certainly the first, or it's the most.
It's a bit of a Steve Bradbury, though, isn't it?
Well, one swallow does not make a spring, but at the moment they had a bit of a windfall. So I want to talk about that. In the last 7 months, when you grow the pie, Bryce, guess what happens?
What happens, Ben?
The revenue flows in. Like if you run a good economy, and let's also be mindful that they picked up the fastest growing economy in the world when they took power post-COVID. So the economy rebounded strongly. But here's what happens when you grow the pie. You get $152.6 billion of improved income coming into the federal budget in the last 7 months, and that's what delivers you your surplus. Of concern for me, Bryce.
Yeah.
Here we go. Here's the concern.
Yeah, all right.
Over 50% of the money that's now received which is $300 billion in the 23-24 budget, will actually come from personal income tax. Our structural budget is completely a miss. So I'm going to have a whinge about that. GST revenues, $100 billion, is forecast by 26-27. I've been on about GST. It is the most fairest tax. It's a consumption tax. It needs to increase to be fair across all aspects. We don't want our politicians to basically keep robbing us of our money. I don't care what persuasion of politics you're in. Company tax revenues, $138 billion, and that's going to improve next year by $28.9 billion in 23-24 financials. In terms of overall company tax improvements, $52.7 billion over the next 5 years. Keep growing the pie, people. Keep growing the pie, and if you can, reduce spending where you can reduce spending. So let's summarise a couple of the big points. First home buyers from a property point of view, from July 1, access to the home guarantee scheme will be expanded to allow for 2 people, including siblings and friends, to purchase an eligible home with a 5% deposit. I like that idea, but just always make sure you put a contract in place.
Yes.
Make sure you put a sales contract.
Everything starts out well, Ben. It's how it finishes that's important.
Correct. And then also in terms of non-first home buyers who have not owned a property for 10 years will also be able to access the scheme. So I think we've talked about that previously. From a renter's point of view, rental assistance, $2.7 billion towards increased maximum repayments, rates for the Commonwealth Rental Assistance Program by 15%. So that now increases to $31.36, I think, over a fortnightly basis, to take that maximum over the fortnight to $240. So I think that's a good thing. Obviously, rents are going up and harder for those people who are obviously in the lower socio-economic area. That's also important. Additional $2 billion will be directed to the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation, which has an investment mandate to deliver at least 1,200 social and affordable housing homes in terms of across states and territories over the next 5 years. Here's another whinge, Bryce.
Oh.
Build to rent sector. So the managed investment trust. Check this out. So thanks, mum and dads. Thanks for doing the heavy lifting and being investors and supplying the critical rental stock across the nation for the last 25, 30 years, whilst the government has abandoned the commitment to build social and affordable housing. So here's what we're going to do for you, mum and dads. Nothing at all. In fact, we're going to make it harder for you. But hey, you guys, your big end of town, international investors, here's what we've got. We've got a little sweetener for you. So we're going to make managed investment trusts, the withholding tax will be reduced by 50%, Bryce.
Ooh.
50%. So now instead of paying 30% tax, they're going to pay 15% tax for newly constructed build-to-rent developments. And the capital works tax deduction, which we get over a 40-year period, I think at 2%, they get 100%, or 2.5, I should say. They get almost 100% increase. They get to write down that capital investment at 4%.
4%?
4%. So there we go. And so it's very challenging for mum and dads. We get nothing but the big end of town. Here's all the big incentives to hopefully increase the number of build-to-rent properties. So dwellings need to be, get this right. So the dwellings need to be held under single ownership for at least 10 years in this investment trust. And then landlords must offer a term of at least 3 years for each dwelling. And the government expects that the scheme will deliver 150,000 new rental properties over 10 years. Nothing for mum and dad investors to help with the critical need for rental accommodation at the moment. Sorry, you guys get nothing. In fact, we're probably going to make it even harder for you with new regulations and controls. But no worries, big end of town. Bring your foreign investment money in and we'll give you huge tax deductions, but we won't look after mum and dads.
Mate, so tell us what you really think, mate.
I want to also note tax dodgers. There's some interesting stuff in here. So Treasury is also hoping to claw back $9.1 billion in unpaid tax over the last 5 years by ramping up investigations in a slew of compliance programs that were announced also in the budget on Tuesday. Now, this is the big one in terms of for mum and dad property investors. So there is GST, tax avoidance, and personal income are a particular target. So this is what we know. The government is going to, they have demanded records of individuals in terms of loans that they have in banks, and they are going to do a data match. And so it's really important that if you have redrawn money out and said that was for investment purposes and you've claimed tax deductibility on that, this data match will actually, its job is to try and detect that error that you've made and then recoup all of that interest that you have claimed. So it is going to be these very, very sophisticated data matching services are going to get better and better and better. So don't lie about the fact that you took that redraw out to use that money and then you started to claim interest on an investment property when we've told you that's not what you're allowed to do. Ultimately, you can't take equity out of an investment property and then reset the loan and then try and claim that full loan interest. You're going to get found out under this data matching program that they're doing with the banks. So be very, very careful of that in regards to that. And Bryce, I thought maybe you can just round off this little budget update because there's really not much else in there. Terrific news for for those people who are doing it tough with the 14 billion or almost $15 billion worth of additional support for them. I think the budget in general is an okay budget for now, because obviously anything further in terms of spending is going to be really challenging from
Lots
an
of targeted
inflationary
spending, wasn't there, to try and be mindful of inflation?
Yeah, that's right. And so I think it helps with monetary policy, but it is still inflationary. Let's make no mistake about it. But it's not as dangerously inflationary as a big spending budget. But Labor will be true to form next year, and they'll go back to running deficits, where ultimately they basically spend more than they earn. So if they could also reduce that spending. But where do we spend our money, Bryce, as we close out this episode?
Yeah, 684.1 billion was committed in the budget. So social security and welfare was the biggest recipient at 250.3 billion. That's one of the great things about living in this country, Ben. So there is a
big
safety net
net.
there. Other purposes, undefined 133.7, health 106.5, all other functions at 73.3, education at 48.3, defence at 42.8, and general public service at 29.1 billion. Add all those up, Ben, it comes to 684.
Yeah, look, and if I finish off my observation here is, if there is a time when you look at our country and you say, was I born in the lucky country? It's usually after budget night, right? Because we are very fortunate to be a wealthy and prosperous country by design, and we are able to spend all of this money, $684 billion, and have a very reasonable safety net. It is always interesting when you watch on the Twitter sphere and everywhere else where people are putting their hands out and wanting more. The only reason why that is there is because of growing the economic pie. So we've got to continue to run a super strong economy. We've got to continue to keep thinking about that. But we've also got to hopefully change our mindsets that, what can the government give me as opposed to what can I contribute productively into the economy? Because the more production, the more productive we are, the bigger the pie we grow. The bigger the pie we grow, there is more money to spend. But it can't be the other way around. If we're all on the take and everyone puts their hand out at the government time, at budget time, I should say, that's ultimately where we're going to ultimately get ourselves into trouble over the medium to longer term. So we are a lucky country. And that lucky country means when I look at all the money that we're dedicating to social services, to health, to education, we're in a pretty good shape. And so our problems are first world issues. You don't need to look very far to get context in terms of other nations who would dream to be able to provide these types of services on the back of those people who do all the work that they do and the wealth creation that they build for this nation, to be able to then share some of that to our more needy and most vulnerable.
Here, well said. Thank you for sharing what's making property news as the budget relates to property as it delivered earlier this week. Thanks again to Chad for a wonderful chat. We enjoyed it very, very much. I think our audience will get a lot out of that, mate. But until next week.
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
Well said. See you next week, folks.